Alright everyone, welcome back again to my Tier 1 overlook for each nation. Last video we covered the controversial yet very fun Russians. And today I'm going to be doing the Japanese. Now, what do the Japanese bring to the table that all the other nations in the game don't? And that is maneuverability. The Japanese planes, for some reason not the biplanes though, but I'll explain later. The Japanese planes turn better than pretty much every other nation in the game, as an overall. So let's start off Japan Rank 1. There's a good chunk of planes here. So we'll start off with the reserve as always. You start off with the Ki-10s. The Ki-10-1, which is this here. The Ki-10-2, and then the Ki-10-1C. I did not mean to do that. Customization. Ki-10-2, basically the same thing. And then the Ki-10-3. Unfortunately, I'm gonna say most of the reserve planes, they're basically all the same. I'm gonna be going over the penultimate Ki-10-1C here, so like the top tier reserve plane, just to kind of go over what to expect from Japanese. Oh my god, sorry, I just got out of work and I'm tired. So anyway, let's start off with your turn time. 15.7 seconds. Now remember, this is just rudder turn. You will turn faster in-game. But there's one thing you immediately need to know about the Japanese. Is that this 15.7 here for here, that gets a lot better, trust me. The biplanes don't even give the Japanese justice in terms of turning. Alright, so then we move on to our guns. Get two 7.7 Type 89 machine guns with 900 rounds. And they are stored up in the nose here, firing out of the prop hub. The best way I could describe these is that they kind of look like the HE-51s from the German tech tree. And they kind of play just the same, except unfortunately these guns aren't that great. Now, I might be wrong here, but talking about these guns, I think they're copies of British guns, because the British reserve planes, well, at least a couple of them, mostly the Nimrods and the Furies, kind of have the same, it kind of feels like they have the same guns. And the reason why they're not that great is because they fire slow. You can see how long it takes to overheat the guns. I'm actually taking off here. The Ki-10s have no flap control, unfortunately. But you've come to expect that from most reserve planes. Not all, because you'll see there's a few that actually do. Now, I will admit though, the Japanese do have a pretty decent roll rate, so your maneuverability is there. You know, you can, get on target. It's just actually using those guns to get on target. Now, it does get better, but in terms of Japanese planes, these little 7.7s here, you're gonna have to get used to. A lot of the tech tree has these little guns. just... I've been firing these guns for so long, and I'm only down to 374 rounds. I will admit, though, these things are pretty quick. And just in gameplay experience, it just feels like the Key-10s, they seem to outrun a lot more than what you think, so... I guess that's a plus, but in biplane gameplay, say that 5 times fast, they just... That speed really doesn't, unfortunately, bring you much because everything's turning on everybody. So, heading back into the hangar here for a more detailed look of these Key-10s. And, unfortunately, there's not a lot to look at. These are planes you're going to want to kind of get rid of unless they leave an impression on you, which, if they do, more power to you. Heading over to the armor, absolutely nothing. But then we move on to the internals. You see, it's like most biplanes. You've got a fuel tank, not self-sealing, by the way. So once you get a fuel leak, this thing goes. And it's a pretty tiny fuel tank, too, on both of them, so... But, then again, most biplanes, if you get caught on fire, you're basically dead anyway. So, that's the Key-10s. But, moving on from the Key-10s, things get a little weird. The Japanese is the biggest nation in the game that just makes me go, what? I've had more weird things happen to me in Japanese planes than almost any other nation. So, I mean, the Japanese are known as the flying UFOs in game, so who knows? Maybe that's something to do with it. So, moving on. The F1M2 is kind of the meme plane. Now, I say meme plane because every nation kind of has a plane that just sort of sucks. And this one, I would say, is the best out of the tier 1 planes that probably got removed from the game and I just don't even know it. But no armor. Nothing really spectacular about the internals. You lose the fuel tank up here, but you get this little thing down here. And it is self-sealing, though, so... I also think maybe there's a fuel tank down here. I feel like there would be, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But the F1M2 is basically a Key-10. It turns a little bit slower. It's a Key-10 that happens to carry some bombs. These two 60-kilogram bombs. Which, I mean, they could take out like an AA gun or an artillery position. But they're just there just to have bombs, I guess. They're basically Key-10s with a little turret back here. And it's the same guns firing forward as it is backwards. So, there's that. Nothing really spectacular about it. It is a float plane, so if you just want to cruise around the water, that's always fun. But here's where the planes start getting a little weird. Moving on up to 1.3, you get the A5M4. The A5M4 actually decreases the turn time than the biplanes. This thing turns better than most of the biplanes in the game. Just put on the universal rounds. Also, for most of these 7.7s, this is the kind of loadout you're going to get. You have a tracer belt, which has tracers and armor piercing. That's basically it. I mostly just use the stealth rounds because it has an incendiary round and then an adjustment incendiary round. But if you're using realistic, probably then universal will be your best bet, so you can actually see. Plus, you also get a incendiary round in there. But just for simplicity here, I'm going to be going with the universal just so you can actually see where I'm firing. The A5M4 is also the first naval plane for Japan. I know I don't cover the historical attributes of these planes all that much, but this was the first, I think, monoplane carrier-based fighter in the world. Now, you can just see that even with or without flaps, this is a really frickin' small circle that I'm flying. This is similar to what the I-15 was in the Russian video. This is just absurd. It's weird to me that the Japanese monoplanes turn better than the biplanes. So, and of course, armament's the same, just the same 7.7 machine guns. They are mounted in the nose here, so they're going to be fairly easy to aim at longer distances. It's just these guns at longer distances kind of suck, because they do fire slow. They at least have a decent muzzle velocity that I've noticed. So the problem isn't hitting them, it's getting enough bullets on target, which sometimes works. So I know I ragged on a lot about the Italians and their guns and how they sucked, but at least this, you at least get the muzzle velocity of a decent gun. So then moving on to armor, absolutely nothing. You do have fixed landing gear here, so that's going to create a lot of drag and keep that speed down, unfortunately. But, you know, like I said, it is a carrier-based fighter, so if you're flying in realistic, you can land on carriers, which this thing is super easy to land anyway. It's so maneuverable. And on the internals here, you have some fuel tanks that go about a third of the way down the wing. And like I said before, really at any low-tier plane, you really don't want to get hit all that much, except for a few exceptions. But this is the kind of plane to where you actually don't have to be worried about being hit all that much, because if anything starts shooting at you, you just outturn them. So that's the A5M4. Then we move on to the Ki 27. Now, I don't know if it's the Ki-27 or the Ki 27. That's just how I pronounce it. And this is the first plane that makes you kind of go, what the hell? Because first of all, 9.8 second turn time on a freaking monoplane. That's better than the A5M4 by a good by a good margin. It's also a carrier-based fighter, but this is the thing that kind of makes me go, what's going on here? It has armpit boobies. Now, I didn't come up with that term. Bohika from Bowtime Gaming, he did a video discussing about Japanese planes, and he called them the same thing, so I'm just riding on that train there. But I mean, I don't know what these are. I don't know what they do, but they're very distracting to look at. They look very tumorous, and I feel like I should take a saw to them. But anyway, moving on. Same 7.7 machine gun loadout. The guns aren't that great, but you're maneuverable enough to where you can actually keep those guns on target for a decent amount of time. So you'll have some mild success here and there with these guns. It's also significantly faster than the A5M4. 321 versus 289. So you're almost like something on the lines like 60 miles an hour faster. Now, I don't know if this was a carrier-based fighter or not. We'll see. It's not, because it's spawning me on the island. But with these low battle ranking planes, if you're playing it in realistic, you can land on a carrier in this thing, trust me. It also has a fully enclosed cockpit, so that's nice, I guess. The plane has, again, no armor to speak of. Unfortunately, unlike the A5M4, it only has landing flaps. So being able to I don't know, I guess it can help you turn, but it also bleeds off a lot of speed. You can see up in the top left corner, 135. And now I'm being told to retract my flaps, but you're playing, you know, realistic, that these flaps will rip off. But if you're playing arcade, they won't go anywhere. As you can see, I'm not even leaving this patch of dirt on the ground. That's how great this thing turns. That's with the flaps. Let's see without the flaps. Now, I'm not doing a perfect turn here, but... Now, you can see how it maintains in speed. It's actually going faster as I'm going through the turn here, so these planes were meant to turn and meant to maneuver. You see the same 7.7 gun loadout. This time horizontally at the sides of the nose here. You get this really dumb scope that sits on the front of the plane here. I don't know why that's a thing, but it is. You also get a nifty little rear view mirror. That's, I don't know. That's just what makes this plane go, you know, what the hell to me. It's just, it's just so weird that a monoplane like that turns so well. I don't know. Maybe it has to do with the armpit boobies. I don't know. There's a few planes in this game that once you get a first look at them and you're just kind of like, what the, you know, what? And it just sort of, I don't know, makes you feel weird, I guess. But, I know, it's a great fighter, so, I mean, it's a great fighter, but the guns aren't that great, so. But, you know, like I said before, you're Japanese. You'll be able to get kills because you're very maneuverable to, you know, especially at biplane games, you're maneuverable enough to keep up with them. Armor plating, absolutely nothing. You'll find this a lot at the Japanese, mostly because they kind of decided against armor plating because they wanted to keep their planes light and fast, which makes sense, but later down the road, when your pilots are getting knocked out left and right from even stray machine gun fire or flak, you want some armor. Kind of the same thing as before. Ooh, I can figure out what these things are. They are gas tanks. Alright, so not only are these things armpit boobies, but they also will catch fire as soon as they're hit. You also have some smaller fuel tanks in the wings here, also not self-sealing, so once these get hit, they're going to spew gas everywhere. Everything else just kind of crammed up here. There's like nothing back here at all except the cables. I'm going to want to take that off for when I show off the next plane. So, Japan also has a heavy fighter line. You start off at battle ranking 1.7 with the J1N1. Now, this is the most unique heavy fighter I've probably ever seen in this game. Because it also kind of makes you go, what the fuck? Because of these things. The fuck are those? Well, obviously they're defensive turrets, but why does it look like R2-D2 and his buddy is just chilling out in the back of my plane? Well, because for one reason or another, they're there. I don't know any history about this plane whatsoever, so we'll just, we'll take it. By the way, these turrets, great firing arc. Take it out into a test flight here. Just kind of showing you here that, you know, you can carry 2 60-kilogram bombs. They're really nothing. But same sort of rounds here for the offensive guns. And you get a armored targets belt, which is tracer and then armor piercing. Or you get this, which is tracer and then armor piercing. It's basically, this one has more AP rounds in it than tracer rounds. And this one just has tracer armor piercing. I just use this one just because most things you're going to be shooting at with these turrets don't have armor in the first place, so why have the bullet fly right through it? And for those of you who have noticed, you also get your first Japanese 20mm cannon. Now this is a Ho-5, I think. Let me go here. No, it's a Type 99 Mark II cannon. Granted, you only get 60 rounds. So you're going to have to be careful with this because it does fire fairly quickly. But those two 7.7s, you have 1,200 rounds of them, so they'll be able to pick up anything. But once this cannon runs out of ammo here, it's funny because you have more ordnance going backwards than you do forwards. But anyway, I'll just show you what I mean. Now I have stealth belts for the 7.7s for this plane, just because I don't care where the 7.7s go, I'm more focused on where the 20mm goes. So, there's your pilot and your gunner. Your gunner is actually pretty far away from your turrets there, but you can tell here, fairly large cone of fire from about there to about here. And since they're 7.7s, you know, they don't fire that fast, but you do get 4 of them back there, and you do get a pretty decent muzzle velocity out of them, so, you know, you can kind of see what they're capable of. It's a heavy fighter, so obviously it's not going to be as maneuverable as the smaller monoplane fighters, so I would suggest doing more boom and zoom tactics, where you climb up and dive down on them. Anybody that gets on your 6 is going to regret it pretty easily, especially if they sit behind those guns for long enough. So, since we have stealth belts here, you can see the 20mm cannon going off. Oh, well, I did have stealth belts, but I don't know why it's doing that. Small caliber guns. Sure, let's just so, those are your small guns. And that big one that's coming through there, that red one, you can see it in the middle, that's your 20mm cannon. So, you do have the 20mm cannon kind of right here. It's kind of hard to show you in a test flight, but so we'll head back to the hangar here. Now, the reason why I'm showing out test flights here is because there's not a lot of Japanese Tier 1 planes, so just kind of showing off what they look like in game and what they're going to look like in a battle. But that 20mm cannon sits right there, and that's what's going to be doing most of the heavy lifting for you. These 20mm cannons will, since you're at 1.7, you will be facing a lot of early monoplanes, biplanes. This thing will rip them up. But like I said, don't turn with anybody, just climb up, zoom down, fly away, rinse, wash, repeat. Or is it wash, rinse, repeat? There we go. Wash, rinse, repeat. You don't rinse before you wash. Anyway, going on to the internals, you actually do have a piece of armor plating here for the pilot, but unfortunately, you'll see that they don't need to hit the pilot in order to shoot down this thing, because you've got some pretty large fuel tanks here, about halfway down the wings. So, again, Tier 1, you don't want to get hit with these things. You also have this random dude sitting here. I didn't even know he was in there. I thought it was just gunner and then pilot. This guy must be a navigator of some kind, because he's just you know, kind of chilling. He's not modeled in he might, I mean, he's modeled because he's right there. He's labeled as a gunner, but I'm pretty sure he's a navigator in real life. But you know, J1N1, it's actually a lot of fun. This is probably my favorite low-tier Japanese plane, just because you have really cool turrets back there. You got a pretty decent forward armament, and you know, it's a cool-looking plane. Very very aesthetic, very pleasing to the eyes. It has high aesthetic. Then we move on to the Tier 1 Japanese bomber, the Ki-21 the Ki-21LA? Is that an L? I think it's an L. And in terms of bombers, it's okay. You know, your defensive armament is just going to be the 7.7 guns here, but And then also in terms of your bomb loadout, you get 20 50s, 10 100s, 4 250s, or 2 500s. I usually just do the 2 500s. This is going to be more of a base bombing bomber than a ground attacking bomber. Unfortunately, at 2.0 battle ranking, you're going to have some maps where you don't have bombing targets and you're going to have to use your bombs to take out ground targets. But I mean, it is what it is. It's a tier 1 bomber. It's also not that great of a bomber. You don't see these flown out all that much. Not as much as the next bomber that's on this line, though. So you got pilot and co-pilot. You got a front gunner here with a Type 89 machine gun back here. And he kind of... I don't know why, but his gun's just facing downward. I mean, I'd figure have the gun facing at least somewhere up, or at least somewhere in the middle that you can do both. But you've got this guy back here who's got 2 of these 7.7 machine guns kind of together. It's weird. It's kind of like one of those double-barreled things, like on the Ju-88. You know, it has a decent firing arc, but because the gun is pointed up like that, it's not going to be able to fold down all that much. This guy is the guy that's going to be firing down most of the time. You know, just laying down right here. So this guy and this guy are going to be doing a lot of work. And if either of these guys get knocked out, you basically are defenseless. And then in the internals, this is the one thing I like about this plane. It's kind of hard to set it on fire because all the fuel tanks are self-sealing, for one thing. That's really nice. And two, they're pretty darn close to one another. You're going to have to kind of hit center mass here and avoid the wings because there's nothing in them. And also, 13-second turn time in a bomber? That's really good. So, I don't know. Maybe this thing isn't as bad as I think it was. I don't know. But then again, when you're flying up at high altitude in low-tier gameplay, barely anybody climbs anyway, so unless you get up-tiered, you're going to have this guy to yourself, pretty much. So then, since we covered the Ki-27, the A5M4, let's move over to the second heavy fighter for the Japanese, the Ki-45 Ko. Now, what's different from this is that it, first off, gets a massive armament upgrade. This is the first time you're going to get these here. It ditches the 7.7s, and you get 2 12.7s Ho 103 machine guns with 700 rounds in the guns. Now, these guns are pretty freaking good. You can have a plane with just 12.7s in them, and they'll do the job. Now, they're not American 50 cals. I think they're like a copy of the Americans. So once again, the fire rate isn't as good, but the muzzle velocity is there. So being able to actually aim with these things is pretty easy. You're just gonna have to get more on target just because you are shooting less ammunition. Unlike the Italians, I keep going back to their 50 cals, to where it's slower and they shoot slower. But your main armament is going to be the 20mm cannon. It's tucked underneath here. It is the Ho 3 cannon, and you also have 100 rounds with it as well. So you're going to hit pretty hard in this thing for a tier 1 battle ranking 2.0. This thing hits pretty dang hard. Once again, I suggest booming and zooming, and just, kind of just go off doing that. These guns here they're great for taking out low-tier bombers if you want to go bomber hunting. They're great at taking out fighters and biplanes, and this is actually a really, really good plane, and I quite enjoy the Japanese heavy fighter line, and it's a nice surprise. In the back here, you have a 7.92 Type 98 machine gun. I was expecting a 7.7, but I think this might be a German machine gun that they just named the Type 98 because, you know, going into a test flight here, it fires a lot faster than the Japanese 7.7s. With the Japanese 7.7s, you hear that ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. This thing fires a lot faster. So, at Battle Ranking 2.0, it actually might do some work. Yeah, you can definitely hear that rate of fire there. Also, its coverage is not very good. It's only like maybe a 45-degree cone behind the plane. Also, it can't really aim anywhere underneath the plane, and that line right there is also, so you're gonna have to get enemies from over here. So don't expect miracles from this guy. But if you get a guy that sits on your 6 long enough, just shoot right into his engine. And just kind of showing off how the 12.7s work, the Japanese 50 cals. Pretty decent rate of fire. And pretty decent muzzle velocity, so they're actually not that bad. And that's everything firing off. You see that 20 mil underneath flashing. Oh, here. This is the 20 millimeter cannon. Kind of a slow rate of fire, but decent muzzle velocity, and at this low of battle ranking, that 20 millimeter will wreck a lot of planes. I'm actually going to show the belts that you can get on 20 millimeter cannons here. This applies for the J1N1 as well because it's, I think, the same gun. Well, it's the Type 99 cannon here. I'm just going to see what type of belts it gets. You get Universal. I mostly just rock Universal just because it has a bunch of high explosive and then an armor piercing incendiary. But with cannons, you mostly want to go with high explosives anyway. Let your small rounds carry the incendiary. You get a ground target belt, which has a lot of armor piercing and then some high explosive. Tracer belts. Oh, you know what? I'm just gonna go with tracer belts because I want the whole belt. High explosive fragmentation. I'll just go with that. Just go with the tracer belt. And then the stealth is high explosive fragmentation and then armor piercing. And I'm pretty sure it might be the same thing for the Key 45. We'll just have to see. Tracers. Nope, it is a different belt. It's not all high explosive for the tracer belt, so you do get the armor piercing tracer and then the high explosive fragmentation incendiary tracer shell. So I'm just go with the universal just because you get high explosive incendiary tracer shell, high explosive fragmentation incendiary. Yeah, just universal. Mostly universal and tracers what I'm going to be using with this. And with the 12.7s, the universals, armor piercing, tracer, immediate action incendiary. I'm also just go with the air targets belt because you just get, or I'm sorry, the stealth belt, because half of your belt is the immediate action incendiary, which is probably the best bullet on there. And once again, I'm mostly concerned about the 20 millimeter cannon hitting and not the 12.7s because cannons. Anyway, moving on. Remember how I said the Key 21 was a, it's not a bad low tier bomber. This thing makes me go, what is going on here? More than any other bomber at tier 1. The H6K4. At battle ranking 2.3, you get a 4-engine float plane bomber. That sounds pretty freaking awesome. I think this is like one of the first heavy bombers you can get in the game. And it shows. You get the two 800 kilogram bombs. Those are massive. You also can get torpedoes. So, get put on a naval map, maybe go after some ships. But now I'm going to tell you why you do not want to go anywhere near the ground. Which I will demonstrate in the test flight here. Also just to kind of show off what the plane looks like when it's taking off from the water, which is a very nice thing to see. Also, there's your cockpit, and everybody here looks like they've seen better days. There's a... Is he, like, looking right behind me? I can't tell. There's a guy... I know there's a guy behind me. Yeah, everybody looks like they've seen better days. But anyway, the problem is with these guns that are on there, and you do get a lot of them. There's one guy in the front here, off the bow of the ship. There's another guy here in the middle, towards the back end there. I'll explain here. And so, taking off here, there's your massive bombs that are actually pretty decent at this battle ranking. Here's why you don't want to go anywhere near the ground. Because although all of your guns can fire almost in the exact same spot. Also, that guy in the back there, that's a 20mm cannon. That is a devastating place to fire. Unfortunately, the 20mm is the only thing that can aim downwards. And anything, look at that, dead zone. This isn't even that far down. Oh, and in the front? Yeah, good luck. You have to go all the way to there. Look at all that dead zone. This one opens up. Yeah, all that dead zone. The entire bottom of the plane is a dead zone. And I'll explain why this thing is it's a very large glass cannon. It's very fun to fly. It's slow, though. That's one thing. It is very slow. The engines on it aren't that powerful, only having 1,000 horsepower apiece. Now, 1,000 horsepower doesn't sound bad, but look how massive this plane is. Only 4,000 horsepower carries this thing up into the air. So, you have a lot of gunners. You got a guy here, guy here, guy here, guy here, and then a guy in the back with a 20mm cannon. Now, it's one thing to have a lot of guns. It's another thing to actually take hits. Because you have no armor whatsoever. And the entire plane is made of fuel tanks. Just fuel tanks here, not self-sealing. All of these fuel tanks here in the middle. Anybody gets a center mass shot on you, you're dead. As soon as anybody starts shooting at you, you will get set on fire and you will die. This plane is very cool to look at. This plane is very fun to fly. This thing dies so easily. The guns on it are amazing. They can't shoot anywhere down, though. They can't shoot anywhere. The 20mm cannon back here is the only gun that can go down. And granted, that 20mm cannon will mess up planes. But the planes don't have to shoot you for very long. Because the whole thing is an unarmored, unself-sealing fuel tank. And that's why I don't fly this thing out all that much, because you are a massive target, you are very slow, and you are very satisfying to shoot down. The H6Ks that I've shot down, they're a spectacle. Seeing this massive fire just bloom over the wings, yeah. But there's a plane after this that redeems this. It redeems the heavy bomber float plane. And that is the H-8K2. This thing is lethal. Not only do you now upgrade your defensive loadout with a 20mm top turret, you still keep the 20mm in the back. You also get a 7.7 down here, so now you can actually aim downward. You can have two guns in the back firing down. You get a turret. It's kind of hard to see. We go into the internals. This guy here, he controls both of these turrets here. There's a turret here and a turret here. This guy here, he covers both turrets. There's a turret here, turret here. Turret in the front with a 20mm cannon. Turret back here with a 20mm cannon. Turret back here, 20mm cannon. Turret here, 20mm cannon. Turret here, 20mm cannon. Turrets here, yeah, they're the 7.7s, but these guys back here are the ones that do all the work. I did not mean to exit out. It also has the same bomb loadout. I just haven't had it fully upgraded. The two 800s. Now, when I say it redeems it, because one, you actually get some armor. Not a lot, but some. You have some to protect your gunners here. You got a little piece back here, but still fairly open back there. And you got one for your pilots. The other thing is that it also has self-sealing fuel tanks. So you won't instantly die when you get set on fire. You also get a speed boost too. These engines are a lot more powerful. Also, this thing is massive. It's kind of hard to tell by just showing you in the hangar, but look how small the people are compared to the plane. Imagine you're standing right here. Yeah, standing right here, you don't even make it to the door. That's how big the door is. This thing is massive, and it's fun, and I love it. Alright, so moving on to Tier 1 Japanese premium planes. You get Hagari's A5M4. Test flight, just customization, just to show off. It's an A5M4 with a kind of a cool paint scheme. The stripes on it look pretty nice. But this is the Japanese aircraft. If the Japanese are the first nation to get a win as their Air Force, you get this for free. I just bought it because I wanted a 1.3 to 1.7 lineup. Or a 1.0 to 1.7. Then you get the A7HE1. Now, I did do a little bit of history on this one. Mind the awful paint job I gave it. But back when the Germans were deciding what to have as their primary fighter, well, Heinkel lost the bet, or lost the competition to Messerschmitt, and the Bf-109 got selected. They ended up selling a lot of these HE-112s to various different nations. And obviously Japan was one of them that wanted them. They bought a few of these, not any in super mass numbers or anything, but it's German guns, and you got a Japanese, paint job on there. Again, mind the horrible paint job I put on it. It looked a little bland to me, so I just threw some different things on there. But it's an HE-111. Or not HE-111, that's a bomber. It's an HE-112. So, if you've flown these over in the German tech tree, you've flown these. Or you've flown this one, I should say. Unless you really like the HE-112, which I do. I don't see why a lot of people wouldn't. The HE-112, it's here in the Japanese tech tree if you want it. It's not super expensive. I think it's like maybe 1,000 Golden Eagles, maybe more, maybe less, but it's fun. It's there. It's the exact same plane as the HE-112 over in the German tech tree. Just, you fly for Japan. So that's Tier 1 for Japan. Not a bad little group. Yeah, the guns could be a little bit better, but they're bearable. Their bombers, well, one of their bombers is okay. The other one is kind of a death trap, and then the other one is don't touch it with a 10-foot pole. This guy right here. Look at that. Flying boat, medium bomber, long-range bomber, torpedo bomber. It does a lot. But that's Tier 1 for Japan. You get some really nice heavy fighters. Some monoplanes that disturb me on how quickly they turn. Kind of a joke plane that's a little bit of fun. Oh, I forgot this guy. The D3A1. I totally forgot about this plane. I'm so sorry. The D3A1 is your attacker, I guess you can say. I say I guess because it's basically a larger M5 or A5 M4 that just so happens to put some bombs on there. See, this plane's not that great. It only gets one bomb loadout where you get a 250 and then 260s. No armor. Everything's kind of cramped together, so in terms of internals, so fairly rugged. But in terms of forward-facing armament, it's just the 7.7, so it's nothing to write home about. I mean, it's the plane that attacked Pearl Harbor, so I guess if that's something to cheer on about, I wouldn't really know. It's spaded for me because I used to fly a lot of ground attackers, and this grinded out a lot of the XP for Tier 1 Japan for me. But I've learned to appreciate their fighters more. It's an okay plane. I'm not saying it's bad by any stretch of the means. It's just, it's very mediocre, especially compared to like the Americans and the Russians and their ground attackers. And that's something you'll find out, is that the Japanese don't really have that great ground attackers. But also, your rear turret is a 7.7. It's the same gun here that it is there. The 92 and the 97 really don't have that much difference. Also, it doesn't have that great of a coverage, like a 45-degree angle on the back here. But yeah, Japan at Tier 1. You get a okay ground attacker. Really nice heavy fighters. Very maneuverable monoplanes. Kinda biplanes. I would get out of these as soon as you can. This plane that I don't even know if it's in the game anymore. And then, like I said before, about the bombers. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching.